Irv has boundless energy, great enthusiasm for science, and he is absolutely one of the most inspiring people I've ever met.
Irv is a visionary. I think there's no doubt that that word really applies to him. He thinks big.
I don't think you can divide Irv from Stanford. He's been so important in building the community there.
I think Irv really appreciated Stanford because Stanford let Irv be Irv.
All of who I am and what I do revolves around the curiosity of how things work. I grew up in Great Falls, Montana, my mother, father, and grandparents, leaving Europe as Jews because of the likelihood that at least the men in the family would be drafted to be in the Tsar's army. My grandfather, on my father's side, he went into the fur trade and then a little later junk and secondhand auto body parts. When I was 10 years old, I read a book called Microbe Hunters, and it was written in such an engaging fashion. I was pretty sure that's what I wanted to do. So when I was just 16, I found out that the local pathologist actually ran a research lab. His name was Ernst Eichwald, and I found a way to work with him. So at one point I said, I'll work for nothing. And he says, great. I was both his autopsy assistant and working in the research lab. Even though I was only a B+ student in high school and never got better at any point in my career, I realized that I could think about science, think about issues that might relate to science.
I first met Irv in Christmas of 1956. I was a freshman at Caltech, and then here was his senior in high school who was doing all these really cool experiments with mouse genetics and all, and making observations that really held up across the years.
During my year at Montana State, there was a Life magazine article about the new medical school, Stanford. But they said at this medical school, they wanted people to follow their own desire to do outside of classroom learning. So there was no question that if I got in, I would go. I've been at Stanford since the fall of 1960. It was a place of open inquiry. So every day in biochemistry, instead of memorizing things for knowledge, we learned how to think about and set up and do an experiment in biochemistry. That was, of course, how I met Arthur Kornberg and Paul Berg. And I'd heard about Henry Kaplan as being a famous guy. I knew he had done some beautiful immunology, so I asked him if I could work with him. And beginning winter quarter my first year, he gave me a lab. This is an amazing university. In the medical school now, next to my institute, I have people who are physicists in the institute, and electrical engineers, and computer scientists, as well as medics and researchers.
Irv's discovery of mechanisms for purifying out stem cells from other cells has been absolutely foundational for the field. Only by separating those cells away from others can you truly understand their functional properties and their unique properties in particular with respect to regenerative medicine.
Amy Wagers and I had showed back in the 90s that a blood-forming stem cell sitting in my long bone of my leg, for some reason, at some time, will go out in the bloodstream and go fill an empty home where a stem cell had left or died. So we knew that if we could transplant the stem cells, they would regenerate the whole body.
What Irv has done that's really remarkable is gone and been very successful at isolating that branching set of stem cell progenitors and characterizing them in sophisticated detail.
And Irv has been a leader in immunology for many, many years, understanding transplant immunology and how it can be manipulated to improve the engraftment of cells.
When I was a postdoctoral fellow with Irv, we discovered a molecule, CD47, that was increased in its expression or increased in its amount on the acute leukemia cells, the AML cells. It really started from mouse studies that Irv had done before I came to the lab.
I remember that day because Robbie came into the office and he showed me, he says, here's the list of genes that are in the leukemia, upregulated but not in the normal stem cell. He said, this is the rest of my life. And he was right.
But it turns out that the AML and other cancers have figured out how to use that system, the system of CD47 and macrophages, to avoid being eaten. So it's really exciting to see something that we've worked on for a decade now, having real benefit for patients and hopefully ultimately get it approved as an FDA approved therapy.
Nothing seemed impossible in Irv's lab, which is a really fantastic thing about working with him. I'm a very shy person intrinsically. The way that Irv is a force of will, he decided that I could be a leader, and therefore I was.
I learned from Irv to dream big, to ask the important questions, to take rigorous approaches, to be creative in thinking about the biology.
Irv, I would say, is among the very few scientists, biomedical scientists in the field who have trained really the next generation. From the period of around 2005 till about 2010, Irv graduated 25 postdocs who went on to become assistant professors. I mean, just think about that. That's a career for almost anybody else. And that was this one 5-6 year period of time.
I've had the luck to have great people come to my lab and to be trained either as grad students or postdocs. They find out if they can devise experiments, because I'm not going to tell them exactly what to do. We go over the research we've had, and then they have to come back to me with what they want to pursue.
Irv has been a leader in the field generally, not just in terms of the science, but also in terms of policy. The research in his laboratory was never ethically debated, but nonetheless, he came to the defense of other parts of the field.
Irv was a major visionary for that effort that ultimately resulted in the founding and formation of CIRM, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, that has gone on to fund stem cell biology across the entire state and really make California the leaders of stem cell biology.
I think the other side is he's really intrigued by the challenge of cancer and is thinking about novel ways to attack cancer.
We might change metastatic breast cancer, like Henry Kaplan changed Hodgkin's disease, into a highly curable disease. That's my goal anyway, and I'm pretty sure we'll do it.
Irv's work is foundational for the field of stem cell biology, and really where that field goes will owe a huge debt really to the work that he's done.
It's safe to say that Irv is Stanford medicine, whether that be fundraising to establish the Loki stem cell building or becoming the director of the Stanford Institute for Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine, really an initiative that he pushed forward on his own.
I believe Arthur Kornberg and Paul Berg really changed Stanford medicine. I think Irv has changed it by virtue of the enormous depth and dimensionality of the research he's carried out.
He obviously considers Paul a mentor and friend and recognizes the contributions that Paul has made to Stanford and biomedicine and wanting to honor that legacy. And I can think of no better award for Irv to win than this Kornberg Berg Award.
Getting the Kornberg Berg Award is special to me because those two people, not only in the science they did, but everything they did in how they taught classes, how they approached new findings, they're what made Stanford great. I'm very, very lucky, but I did find that I could take advantage of luck. I could observe what was happening and then change courses and eventually not be afraid to change courses.